Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ba'd. So alhamdulillah, we're going to be talking today about marriage and divorce in Islam. And the subtitle is what Muslims should actually be doing. So that means that Muslims are doing something when it comes to marriage, and they're doing something when it comes to divorce. But oftentimes what they're doing is not necessarily in line with what Islam recommends, or sometimes even in line with what Islam condones. So it's very important that Muslims have a grasp of this subject because, marriage is a very important part of Islam, and divorce is unfortunately an important part of Islam, meaning not necessarily unfortunately, but the way in which it happens. So actually, this topic is a very big topic, and I was pressured by our new Muslim group 2 weeks ago that I absolutely have to do this topic, especially the first part in terms of how you're supposed to get married. And they sufficiently put enough pressure on me that I decided to do this as soon as possible. And their assumption was that new Muslim converts need this topic. And my response was, no, you're mistaken. All Muslims need this topic, because the same confusions that people who are new to Islam have, the same confusions that many, I would say even most Muslims have about topics of marriage and divorce both. So that's how this topic came about in the first place. So I thank them, first of all, my Coffee with the Sheikh group 2 or 3 weeks ago, for pressuring me to do that. And my other disclaimer here is, this topic is really a loaded topic. There's a lot of topics to cover. So this could easily become an 8-hour seminar. If it was an 8-hour seminar, though, our attendance would go down and less people would be able to benefit from the actual topic which people need. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be condensing 8 hours of information into about an hour and 15 minutes approximately, and then hopefully we take time for a Q&A. And lastly, we have a school, California Islamic University, which has an entire course on all the details of marriage and divorce. And we have a table outside. If you're interested in enrolling, you could take the class online, or you could take the class in person when we offer it next. So that's calislamic.com. It's a little plug right there. All right, so let's get started. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So first of all, what is the purpose of marriage? The purpose of marriage, from an Islamic perspective, is important to actually talk about. And the reason why it's important is because many people, they think marriage is almost like obsolete. They don't even understand the reason why people get married in the first place. In fact, in 2014, the Pew Research Center, which is one of the most reputable survey statistics-based centers in the United States, perhaps in the world, they said that the attitude of Americans has shifted significantly. In 1960, 68% of people who were in their 20s, they were getting married, right? So they were already married. So in 1960, 68% of people in their 20s were already married. In 2008, the number of 68% dropped to 26%. So 1/3 reduction in the number of 20-year-olds who are married. So you see a drastic change taking place in terms of the marriage rate and how the delay in marriage is taking place. And then they had another statistic and another survey. They said 39% of Americans believe marriage is obsolete. And it's just an institution that's done. It's just not even needed anymore. There's just no purpose to it. So that's why it's important to go back and look and say, well, what is the purpose of marriage in Islam from an Islamic perspective? Well, first of all, for those people who are looking to get married, it's the only means of having a lawful relationship in Islam. There's no boyfriend, there's no girlfriend, there's no dating, there's no intimacy outside of marriage. So there's the physical need, and then there's an emotional need. But beyond the physical and emotional aspect, it's designed to help people to establish a family. And if you understand that marriage is designed to establish a family, then we have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of family? The purpose of family is to regulate relations between people in order to understand that, you know what, there is a social unit within a society where family is closer than other people. Your neighbor is close to you, but not as close as your family, right? Your distant friend who lives down into another city doesn't have the same type of relationship to you or responsibilities towards you and rights towards you, for you, as your neighbor would have. So what happens is there becomes a priority between your level of responsibility towards your family that you don't have towards someone who's not your family. So that's part of the purpose of family. And this may seem very obvious to some people. They say, well, why are we even talking about that? Well, for quite a lot of people, they're not understanding that purpose. That purpose has become obsolete now. Everything is about an individual lens. You're individuals, you're people. There's no such thing as family values. In fact, there's no need for marriage in the first place. It's obsolete. So that's why it's important to look back and say, what does Islam actually say about marriage? Now, when it comes to the legal aspect, the default rule in Islam is that marriage is sunnah mu'akkada. Sunnah mu'akkada means it's something which is highly recommended in Islam. It's not absolutely required, such that you will be sinful if you don't get married, but it's highly, highly recommended, and if somebody tries to go against it on purpose without having a good reason, then potentially they can become sinful. So that is the default rule. But then Muslim scholars came along and said, but if you cannot control your desires and you're starting to engage or thinking about engaging in unlawful relationships, then that highly recommended status of marriage now shifts and makes it obligatory on you. It's mandatory. You need to get married so that you can prevent yourself and protect yourself from falling into something which is prohibited. Third category that they gave was, if you are not able to fulfill the rights of a spouse, it is either going to be disliked for you to get married or prohibited for you to get married. Let's say you have a problem. You can't stop. You have an anger problem where you lash out at people and you're violent with them. And when you get married, you're going to become violent with your spouse. And you're going to harm your spouse, him or her, significantly, in a very bad manner. What's going to happen? Marriage for you is prohibited. Let's say you're someone who's just very careless. You're not going to harm anyone, but you're not going to take care of their rights and responsibilities either. You need to fix yourself, but in the meantime, marriage for you can potentially be disliked while you're working on yourself. The category of what we call makruh, right? But the default for people who are not in all those other categories is that it's highly recommended, and people should get married as soon as possible. Now, what does possible mean? Three things. As soon as they're able. So the first ability is physical ability. The Prophet, peace be upon him, he spoke to a group of people and he said, Ya ma'ashara al-shabab, oh young people, whoever amongst you is able to get married should get married. He said, whoever amongst you is able. So the question is, what does able mean? Able, number one, means physical ability, right? If you have the physical ability to withstand a marriage. Number two, financial, right? Financial doesn't mean you have to be extremely wealthy. Financial doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have the money yourself. Your family can come and help you. This is a common question for people who are young. Let's say someone is 18, they're in college, they want to get married. So much temptation on college campuses. And they say, but I don't have any money. I'm in a bachelor's degree program. How am I supposed to get married? I have, student loans accruing. I would like to get married, but how am I supposed to do that? Well, you have family. Family is there, and family can potentially support you. So if they're willing to support you and you're mature enough, then maybe you should be getting married, and this will actually protect you and save you in some capacity. So this is another topic. This is another topic that we need to reflect upon in more detail. But that brings us to the third point, and the third point is maturity. Okay, so we have this dual problem in our society today. The problem is people are getting mature slower and slower today. People are in their 30s and they're not mature. They're still coming home and they're playing PlayStation or Xbox all day, and they don't know how they're going to even give attention to a spouse. This is a huge problem, right? At the same time, you have hypersexualized society. Every single billboard you look at on the road, they're trying to sell a car, they're going to put like a woman on top. They're trying to sell alcohol, and there's a half-naked woman in there, and there's a lot of things going on. So you have movies, you have so many things. So the society is hypersexualized. In Islam, you're not allowed to have relationship outside of marriage. And at the same time, because of the society and culture we live in, people are maturing much slower, and they're losing faith and confidence in the institution of marriage. So what do? Well, we have this major problem. The problem is, if you get people married very early and they're not mature, then the marriage is going to break down, it's going to have issues. If you get them married very, very late because they're not mature, well, then now they have hypersexualized society. There's a lot of temptation, and we have other issues in terms of people getting married very late, then people not wanting to get married to them because they're so old now, they've hit 35. They say, I'm finally mature now. They say, yeah, but you're a little bit old, that's going to be hard. You've been living a single life for such a long time. It's hard to even get reaccustomed to living a married life. So this is a social problem that we have. So when it comes to Islam, what is the Prophet, peace be upon him, saying? He's actually saying, get married as soon as possible when you can physically, financially, and you're mature enough to do it. If you're not mature enough, well, start getting mature faster, okay? That's the simple solution. If you don't have the financial ability, have somebody help you, like your family. You can even take, according to books of Muslim scholars, you can even take out loans, or somebody can give zakah money. Okay, I'm not giving a fatwa here, but in the books of fiqh, you can give zakah money for people who don't have the financial ability to get married so that they can get married. Just think about that. Zakah is supposed to go to people who are poor and needy and really in need, but it actually can go to people who have to fulfill a need, such as the need to get married. That's how serious it is, right? So just keep that in mind. So in terms of getting married young, the maturity part is a problem, but at the same time, it was recommended by the Prophet, peace be upon him, to solve those issues, and then people should not wait unnecessarily if they can solve those other issues. If you're unable to do that, he said, and if you're unable to, then you should fast. What does fasting mean? Fasting, when you fast extra outside the month of Ramadan, it helps curb your desires. And when you fast, you're going to be able to develop a level of self-control which will help you with your desires so that you don't fall into something prohibited while you're not getting married. The other thing is, a lot of people have this issue. They say, okay, I'm fasting. I'm not able to get married for financial reasons, for maturity reasons, for cultural reasons, for social reasons, but the fasting is not enough for me. And the reason why fasting is not enough for them is because they're not averting their gaze. What does that mean? It means they're not looking away when they're seeing something attractive. So they're watching rated R movies, they're watching Game of Thrones, there's sex scenes inside that, and they say, but I'm fasting, it's the hadith told me to fast. Yeah, well, the Quran told you to avert your gaze when you see something that you're not supposed to be looking at. So if you keep on looking at things, it goes into your heart and then it stirs your desires even more. So this is something very important for people to understand. Next, we talked about how important marriage is. Next thing is what to look for in a spouse. So what are you supposed to look for? The Prophet, peace be upon him, clarified this in a hadith. He said that people look for different things in marriage. Because some people will look for wealth. They look at the financial status of a person. Some people will look for lineage, meaning like, what family status do they come from? Do they come from an honorable, noble family and all of that? Some people will look for beauty, all right? Some people will look for different things. And then he said, basically he was saying, all of these things is fine. You can look into all of these things, it's okay. But he said, فَالْفَرْ بِذَاتِ الدِّينِ تَرِبَتْ يَدَاكِ. He says, but you need to emphasize and prioritize the deen, meaning the religion. You need to make sure that religiosity, that the person you're looking for, I know you're looking for beauty, you're looking for wealth, you're looking for lineage, you're looking for all those things. Do not forget to prioritize religion over everything else. And if you don't do that, says تَرِبَتْ يَدَاكِ, you're going to find that your hands are filled with dust, meaning you got nothing. You thought you were getting something, but you didn't get anything. So this is a really important point to reflect upon, is that you're allowed to search for all those other things, right? And when we get to online, searching for marriage and all that, you're going to find that, people will be swiping pictures and they're looking at, beauty, or they're checking, what kind of salary the person is making when they're searching for a partner. You can do that. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that per se, but that should never be the number one priority, all right? So if you're making that the number one priority, it's going to be a problem. So when you're searching, make sure religiosity is an important factor. Religiosity meaning that there's a practice of Islam in those people. Now, this is a huge problem as well. How do you determine the practice of Islam? It's not something apparent, right? You can't look at, Tinder or Minder and be like, oh, look, profile picture. That person looks religious. Swipe right. Doesn't look religious. Swipe left. You can't do that, right? Because it's not something apparent. So there are apparent aspects of religiosity, and then there are other aspects which you can never know. You cannot know whether the person who's praying, you can tell, are they praying 5 times a day? Do they go for Jummah prayer? You can ask them and they can tell you, hopefully they're not lying, and you can kind of, it's not that hard to figure out if they're lying or not. But you can't ask them, are you concentrating in your prayers? How could you ever know that? Do you have khushu' in your prayer, right? You can't get to that level. So what you do is, what your responsibility is, what your part and your role is to try to figure out what external factors can you try to gauge a person's religiosity that you're looking for. So what are some of the external factors that you should look for? First of all, you need to look at yourself. You need to see, are you practicing all the external factors? Are you fulfilling all your religious obligations? So you need to think about that. If you're not praying 5 times a day, you're praying 2 times a day, and you're like, but I want someone who's praying 5 times a day, that may be a good thing for you to seek that out. But the problem is, the person who is praying 5 times a day is going to be like, but you're only praying 2 times a day. And they say, yeah, but my goal is to marry you so that I can get up to 5 times a day. Well, the other person's goal is that, my goal was to marry someone who's praying tahajjud as well, so 6 times, so that I can get from 5 up to 6, up to tahajjud. So everyone is trying to marry someone else who's going to bring them up one notch, and now we have an issue, right? And that's where the compromise comes in. The compromise comes in and say, well, you know what? Since you're praying 4 times a day, but you're very handsome or you're very beautiful, I'm going to let that one extra thing go. Or because you have really good financial status, we're going to make some kind of compromise along the way here, right? So you look at external factors. Are they fasting in Ramadan? Are they going and attending the masjid? Are they even part of a Muslim community, right? You look at external factors in terms of their character. Are they a little bit rough? Are they a little bit, tempered? Do they seem to, lose their temper a little bit? Or they seem to be someone who's very friendly and, someone who's talkative versus someone who's quiet? You have to kind of know what you're looking for. Maybe you're looking for someone who's talkative. Maybe you're looking for someone who's quiet. That's not necessarily a religious factor, right? It's not a measure of religiosity, but you're going to go and you're going to put on one side all the external factors of religiosity that you're looking for, and then you're going to balance that out with the other things that you're looking for, and you kind of come to a profile, profile what you're interested in trying to find a spouse, okay? But the key is to look for religiosity, but religiosity is oftentimes measured improperly, and that depends on your understanding of Islam. And that's why it's so important to have a correct and deep understanding of Islam. So for many people, the length of a beard is a measure of religiosity, or it's a measure of extremism, depending on which level you're looking at things, right? So wearing a kufi, for example, I'm only wearing this because I shaved my head, I just came back from Umrah, right? But wearing a kufi in some communities is a measure of religiosity. Right? In many countries, Muslim countries in the world, if this cap is off, it's a problem. I was just in Turkey, and I was leading one of the prayers because we missed one of the prayers. Brother said, "You're not allowed to lead the prayer." Why? Because in Turkey, if you're leading the prayer, this thing better be on top of your head. If it's not, you're not suited. You're not qualified to be an imam, because that is, that's what happens over there. So that's one measure that they have, at least when it comes to prayer. Outside is another issue. So you need to understand, number one, you need to have a good Islamic education that's developed enough for you to understand what are good measures of religiosity and what are not good measures of religiosity. And that just requires either consultation or requires a little bit deeper Islamic education. So that's important. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, was saying, make sure that religion is the number one thing you're searching for. The person should at least be a practicing Muslim in some capacity. In some capacity, and you should understand what capacity you're looking for. The second thing to look for in a spouse is suitability, what's called kafa'a. The Muslim scholars have clarified this. Suitability is culturally dependent. So suitability means what type of character you're looking for. Are you looking that, do they have a very personable character? Do you match with them? Do you align with them? And a lot of this is culturally dependent. But the problem is people are confused about culture. So culture is not your home country in terms of where your bloodline comes from. So most, people who are born in America and their parents were coming from another country, let's say they migrated 20 years ago to this country, and then they grew up in America. Well, if you grew up in a very quote-unquote American way and you're not very cultural, and you're eating burgers and you're eating pizza and you're watching English TV and you don't even speak your native language, then you're not as much of that culture, whether you're Arab or Desi or whatever it may be. You're more American than you are Arab. You're more American than you are Desi. So your culture now is not necessarily that, even though your origin and your roots are that. So you can be proud of that. You should know about your roots, but you should know who you actually are, because that's going to affect the suitability of what you're looking for. So when you're looking for someone and your family comes and tells you you should marry someone in your own culture, you say, okay, maybe there's some benefit and there's some suitability of marrying in my own culture. Good. But what is your own culture? Is your own culture the Afghani culture, or is it the Americanized Afghani culture? Because you've been living here for a very long time. So if you marry someone who just came from Afghanistan like a year ago versus someone who came from Afghanistan 20 years ago, there's a difference potentially in suitability. Now, this is not 100% all the time, but you need to understand what level of compatibility you're going to have with someone else and what level you can relate to them, right? So one measure that I like to tell people, and I researched this as well, it's not just my random theory, but basically if you dream in English, okay, then your native language is English. Even though, it may have been Arabic when you were growing up, it shifted, it changed. If you dream in Spanish, then your native language is Spanish, but if you shift it and you start dreaming in English, then something has shifted now. Your Latino roots have changed. So you need to understand that about yourself. And parents need to understand that about their own children. So if their diet was, and I don't mean their food diet as well, but if their media diet is Hollywood movies, it's very different than if your media diet is Bollywood movies, because that has a major effect on you. So what happens is, like, for example, you heard of Bollywood is like Indian, movies, or if it's Egyptian cinema, dramas or something like that. Whatever you watch, whatever you're exposed to, whatever type of people you're hanging around with, if your friendship circle is primarily non-Muslim, you have very few Muslim friends in the first place, you have a very different culture than someone who has primarily Muslim friends around them. So it's very important to understand the idea of suitability and how it plays a role. And there's a lot of marriage books that are written out there. Some of them are good. Some of them are not so good. Some of them are just bad, okay? But what you need to understand is there's some value in those books written by non-Muslims. There's some value in the books written by Muslims. The ones written by Muslims, like Islamic Marriage by Hidayah Hartford, Islamic Marriage by... it's been a while since I read these. There's a bunch. If you go to a bookstore like IslamicBookstore.com, I don't get commission from them, by the way. All right, so IslamicBookstore.com, and you just type marriage. You're going to see all these different books on marriage. Some of them are good, some of them are medium, some of them are not so good. So I'll just tell you what is the not so good part in these books. If they're written by Muslims, why would they be not so good? The reason why they'd not be so good is because oftentimes you'll have someone who may be a counselor, they may be a trained psychologist, and they will sometimes intentionally or unintentionally impose secular values that they learned in their practice or in their study, which are not necessarily in line with Islamic values. And that's where it's very important to have a good Islamic education to differentiate between where do secular values and Islamic values clash. Otherwise, it's not a problem when they talk about, you know what, here's a gesture, here's how you give a gift to your spouse when you're about to get married, or here's what you look for in a spouse, look for financial suitability and all of that. Usually that advice is pretty good, but some elements of that can actually be contradictory to Islamic values. And if someone doesn't have a good Islamic education, they're not able to identify those things in those books. So that's just a caveat that people need to be aware of. Okay, moving on. How to approach a potential spouse. Okay, people have this argument. They say, well, you know, you have to test drive a car before you purchase a car. Okay, that's true, but you don't test drive everything. You buy phones just by looking at the description of the phone, these really expensive smartphones and everything like that. There's a lot of things you buy without going and testing them out, and you actually know exactly, you know, kind of what to expect. So in Islam, there is no concept of being in a relationship prior to marriage. But there is a concept of getting to know a person for the purpose of marriage before marriage. So this is very important to differentiate because people have a confusion. They think that if you don't get into a relationship with someone, if you're not dating, you're not falling in love, you're not emotionally involved, then that means you don't know anything about this person, you're just going in blindfold, and you're going to get married, and that's an arranged marriage. And that's what an arranged marriage is. Islam is not about arranged marriages. Okay, this is Hindu culture, this is maybe some old Arab pre-Islamic culture. There are some other cultures who do this. This idea of arranged marriage where basically like you show up on the day of, and you're like, you look around the room, and you're like, who am I getting married to again today? You'd be like, oh, that person right there. Oh, good to know. Good to know. Thanks. I'm glad I know now. That happens. That still exists today. Okay? But that is not in Islam. That is not the Islamic concept. Islam allows you to, and in fact, it encourages you to at least understand who you're going to be getting married to. So that's the difference between arranged marriage on one side, which is considered to be one extreme, versus like being in a relationship prior to marriage and saying, I need to get to know the other person. Statistics on relationships, by the way, if you look at them, people will think, well, you know, this is the best way. Because the more you know a person, the better off your marriage is going to be. Go read the data and the research on this. People have been in a relationship for 6 years, they didn't get married. Then all of a sudden they said, okay, let's get married. When they get married, the relationship breaks within 6 months. How does that happen? Why did the 6 years not do something that was going to somehow help them to, you know, have a more successful marriage? It's a long topic, but just check the research on it. Someday, you know, we can talk about that in more detail. So this model is not an ideal model. And this model here is not an ideal model either. But the model of Islam is you get to know somebody almost like a job interview. You don't just, you know, if you're hiring and you're in a company, what do? You interview candidates. When you interview them, what do you talk about? You talk about, hey, what is life going to be like at this company? What is going to be your role? What is going to be my role as a manager? Which team are you going to be working with? You know, how is the company going to move forward? All of these things. So it's very similar to that. Okay, so how do you approach a potential spouse? You have 1, 2, 3, 4 options. Okay, option number 1, you find your own spouse. You find your own potential spouse. So what should you do? If you're going to go and find your own potential spouse, first thing you should do, generally, is you inform your family that you are searching. and that you're asking and that you're looking around. Okay, because what's going to happen is if you don't inform your family and you're going around, then your family finds out, wait a minute, what do you think you're doing? I didn't know. I was searching for somebody else, or I was thinking you were going to marry, so-and-so cousin from some village or something like that. It can become a disappointment. It can become a problem. So it's very important to inform your family, whoever's the closest family members to you, that you're asking, you're searching, you're thinking about it. Ask them. Once you find a potential spouse, someone who you think, hey, this may be somebody suitable, option number one is you can go and ask them directly. Okay, you could just go up to them, walk up to them, and ask them directly and say, hey, I saw you at the masjid, and you don't use this wording, but this is my joke, okay? But I see you at the masjid. You seem to be a good potential spouse. Would you like to sit down and discuss future marriage? Okay, that's obviously not the line you should use, but you get the point. You go and you ask directly. Now, what's interesting is that people oftentimes, they quote the example of Khadija. They say Khadija, the first wife of the Prophet ﷺ, she actually went and approached the Prophet, peace be upon him, right? She didn't ask directly, by the way. A lot of people don't know that, but she did approach him, through a friend. So they say, well, is it okay for a woman to go and approach a man too? So in Islam, the answer is yes. A man can approach a woman, and a woman can approach a man. But at the same time, you need to be aware of culture. And even though we seem like we're a society that doesn't have as much culture in America, there's still a culture. So if you look at, in America, there was surveys done, 93% of women prefer to be asked out on a date rather than to go and ask a guy out on a date. Now these are non-Muslim statistics. Don't try and say, oh, did you just say it's okay to go on a date? No, okay? But what we can learn from statistics within our society, even if they're coming from a non-Muslim culture, because it gives us some idea of how relationships function just in general. So that means that if guys are standing around waiting, say, you know what, maybe my Khadija is going to come and ask me. Well, you know what? The statistics are looking at 93%, not chance that's not going to happen. All right? So that's what it's looking like, right? So maybe you want to think through some of those things before you make that decision. Second option under finding your own spouse is you ask through a friend or a family member. So this is a pretty clever way of doing it, especially if you're afraid of rejection. What do? You go to one of your friends, go to your family member, go ask your father, ask your mother or something like that. Say, you know what, that girl seems like a good girl. Or, that guy potentially may be suitable. So you find the interest of the person, and you go and you ask, say, can you ask on my behalf? And they go and they talk and they ask on your behalf. That helps for a number of reasons. Number one, sometimes in the culture, there's an awkwardness, or it's inappropriate to go and ask directly in some cultures. So you just need to know what those cultures are. We're such a culturally diverse community that people need to understand that difference. So that's number one. Number two, you may be afraid of rejection. So if they say, you know what, they go and ask on your behalf, you don't get rejected directly in front of you. Maybe they want to ask without mentioning your name. So your friend goes along and says, hey, by the way, you know what, I was just, there's a brother who's interested in you, and just wanted to know, are you potentially interested in getting married? The person says, I'm already married. So, oh, sorry, okay, never mind. So now you go back, the guy doesn't feel embarrassed, right? And he's like, oh no, I can't believe I went up to someone who's already married. So maybe that could save you some level of embarrassment. Option number three, you ask directly to the family of that person. So sometimes you don't approach a person directly. Even if you're finding your own spouse, you go and you ask the family of that guy or that girl. And in some cultures, or many cultures, that is the more appropriate way. And I warn people, if you go and you approach someone, potentially, in some cultures, if you approach them and you ask them, and they say, yeah, you know what, I would consider it, let me go talk to my family. You talk to your family, and the family goes, had they come to us first, we would have considered it. Now this person is blacklisted, you're never going to marry this person off the books, completely. It's very, very common, right? Who knows what I'm talking about? Raise your hand, come on, raise your hand. You know what I'm talking about. There's some cultures like that, that's it. If that person approached that sister or that brother directly, you just lost your chances, right? So now how do you know which culture that is? You go on culture.com. No, I'm just kidding. Sadly, there's no way to know that, right? So it's almost like a gamble. There's no transparent book that's going to tell you this family wants you to approach the family, and this family says, you know what? Don't waste my time. Just go talk directly. That's the issue with different cultures, okay? Fourth option is you ask through a friend or a family to the family. You send your friend to go and ask the family, because you know if the friend approaches the person directly, then the family can cut you out. So it gets complicated, right? So that's option number one, finding your own spouse. Option number two, finding a friend or a matchmaker to find a spouse on your behalf. Now, if you have someone who's socially connected, this socially connected friend, socially connected auntie, who's going around, they go around and they're known to have, matchmaking services. That's just something that they do. Most of them don't even get paid. That's like a hobby that they do. And they ask for what's called a bio data. Yeah, it's a weird concept, right? It's like a profile. Send me your, what do you call it when you apply to jobs? Resume, your CV, right? It's like a resume. So they're like, give me your resume, and I'm going to go around. I'm going to search for, you look like this and that, and I'm going to go around. Unfortunately, this is dying out due to culture, because this is not very common in American culture, since everyone's dating anyways, and 39% of people don't believe in marriage anymore. It's dying out. And the number two reason why it's dying out is usually the people who are doing this, they're getting old. And when they get old, become the old auntie, there's a cultural disconnect. So what you're searching for is not understood by them. So they're going and looking around for you. They're looking in the wrong directions, because that's not what you're looking for. So this is starting to die out. So what I would like to see, honestly, because for a lot of people it's hard to find their own, this is a great thing that used to exist among people. It's kind of dying out. I would love to see a younger generation to kind of revive this with like a younger, more culturally relevant approach. So there's only one that I've seen so far that has tried to revive this. And again, I'm not marketing for them, but it's the only one that I've found. It's a website known as Beyond Chai Matchmaking, right? So Beyond Chai is like one of these websites for Muslims. Chai, if you know what chai is, it's like tea, shai, right? So it's like, you sit down and have shai with someone, but you want to go beyond the shai, meaning marriage. Okay? So they came up with, I don't know, I guess that's the reason. I'm assuming that's the reason why they did that. So Beyond Chai Matchmaking has an interesting thing. They have this matchmaker service, which you can pay for. It goes from $100 a month up to $300 a month. They have like executive, like VIP package or something like that. So imagine someone is really busy and they don't want to sit there spending 2 hours a day on Muslim matchmaking websites and going to conferences and, having their friends network out and search. They're like, look, I got the money for this. Let me go ahead and, pay someone to do this for me. And they know exactly, what you're looking for. They interview you and they start searching for it. I think this model and this concept is great. Maybe not everyone can afford it. Maybe it's costly. But again, think of it this way. This is probably the most important economic decision you're ever going to make in your entire life, right? So it may be worth it. You don't want to be cheap when it comes to these type of things. So that's option number two. Option number three is halal speed dating events. All right, so examples. So when I say speed dating, halal speed dating, all right? So halal speed dating type events is basically where you meet with a lot of people very quickly. It's like 50 people in a room. You're going to do some icebreakers. You're going to talk a little bit about who's interested in this, who's interested in that. And then you get a chance to kind of connect with someone, talk to them for a few minutes. Interesting, connect with someone else. And then you go back for like another round. So there's examples of that, like Half Hour Deen offline. This Masjid IAOC has put on a few events recently as well. This is the third option you can do. Fourth option is online marriage services. So the thing is, the reality is that if you look at online dating users, and I'm going to keep on referring to non-Muslim statistics and dating statistics because there's more data on that than Muslim matrimonial statistics. We don't really have data on that, right? But it tells us something about human nature. If you look at American online dating users, 47.6% are women, 54% are men. It's almost 50-50, right? Which means that both men and women are using online services to find a match for them, even in the non-Muslim community, which means that, the Muslim community is going to be somewhere along the same lines. In 2015, 17% of all marriages began with an online dating service. Right? And that was 2015. Now it's probably 30% or something. I couldn't find the updated statistic. So what you do is you go online and you register your own profile and you take a picture of yourself and you start getting matched up, or you start searching through different profiles after knowing what to look for in a spouse and deciding what to look for in a spouse. And then you start going and contacting those people and doing kind of like quick round of, hey, would you be interested? What are you looking for? All of that stuff. So a ton of websites out there. There's a good website I found called MuslimMarriageSites.com, which lists pretty much all of the main ones that exist out there, right? So you can go through them. Some of them are better. Some of them are worse. Some of them encourage, un-Islamic dating and stuff like that. Some of them are a little bit more strict and they put more policies in there. Some of them have personality tests. Some of them don't have personality tests, right? So there's some benefit to all of this, and you just need to be careful of what you're looking for and what you're doing. Obviously, online matrimonial searching is a little bit more risky than in person. But remember, don't get married online, okay? At least meet the person that you're going to be marrying first, so you know who it is you're getting married to. There's a debate over Tinder or Minder. So who's heard of Tinder? Raise your hand. Who's heard of Minder? Okay, so Tinder is an online dating app. It's a dating app designed for non-Muslims, and it's different than other dating apps, okay? Don't use Tinder, by the way, okay? It's a disclaimer. All right, so what it does is it's different because it shows you the picture of a person. And this is what I've read. I assume if I'm wrong, just correct me. But it shows you a picture of a person's profile. And what you're going to do is if you like their picture, you're going to swipe right. And if you don't like it, you're going to swipe left. And what's going to happen is if the other person swiped right on your profile, there's some kind of match. And then from there, you're going to somehow get connected in some capacity. Do you want to send a message to this person or whatever? So Muslims came along and said, hey, Tinder is so popular. Of course it's popular because you have a bunch of people just looking at pictures and just swiping. So they said, let's make a Muslim Tinder. And we'll call it Minder. So Muslim Tinder is Minder. All right? And there's a lot of users. Okay? So, Tinder has 50 million users. All right? So there's a lot of people. The second top dating website is Badoo, 45 million. Tantan has 20 million. This is all BBC News source, right? So the thing is, we as Muslims need to learn from, I know this sounds weird, but we need to learn from other dating websites in terms of what is a good model, what has worked and what is not working. So there's a huge debate over the idea of Tinder. Okay? And the debate is this. If you're just looking at a profile picture and you're going to swipe right or left, that person is gone. That person may have had the best Islamic character ever. Person may be the nicest person, but you know what? Their picture, number one, they're just not very good at using their phone. They don't know how to use a filter. They forgot to comb their hair that day. When they were registering for the profile, they were really busy and they're like, okay, I'll just take a quick selfie and that's it. So now all of a sudden you just lost a great opportunity because you swiped left, because you just judged by the person's picture and you lost a lot of opportunities. So what that's going to do is that's going to cause people to start becoming very superficial in what they're searching for. And there's a lot of critique in the non-Muslim community about Tinder and what it's doing to society. There's a flip side to that argument. The flip side to that argument is, the reality is, when I keep saying younger generation, I'm kind of dating myself. Like people who are under the age of 40, they tend to be a lot more pickier when it comes to what they're looking for in a spouse than people from the previous generation who are, older now, when they were looking for a spouse. So they're saying if they're pickier, then we need to help them to get married quicker. So how are we helping them? When they realize that the first thing they're going to look at is people are going to look at their profile picture, they need to learn that you better put some effort into your profile picture. You better comb your hair, you better wear some decent clothes, You better learn how to put the right angle on your camera. Have somebody help you to take a good picture, because it means you're not putting enough proper effort in the connection process that is required. When you go to a job interview, you don't just be like, I'm such a qualified applicant, I'm just going to come in I'm going to come in my sweatshirt or something like that. I'm just going to come in my pajamas. You don't do that. You dress up nicely, right? You look good because you know that the interviewer is looking for that too. Although your clothes are not going to determine how good you are in your job function, you still do that. So the flip side argument is Tinder is trying to force people to get you to that level. So I looked at the advertisement for Minder, when I was preparing this, and that's exactly what their advertisement is. Their advertisement shows basically a guy, he's all messed up looking, his beard is all over the place and this and that, and this one girl who's like a fashion designer or something comes in and he's like, you know what, no, this is not going to work. So she comes in, she takes some scissors, she kind of trims his beard a little bit, she combs his hair this way, she makes him stand here, takes a pose, and she takes a picture. Very, well done advertisement. And the advertisement message is that this guy or this girl is not getting as many matches because they're not approaching online matrimonial services in the correct manner. And what they're basically saying is you need to approach it correctly because this is what people see. It's not about making you superficial. People may already be superficial to a level, and at the same time people do judge you online based upon their first impression of you. So there's maybe potential benefit in that. So anyways, that's a long discussion. But the last thing is just when it comes to online matrimonial services, don't be cheap. Everyone wants to go with the free one. Spend a few bucks if you have to, right? This is the most important investment of your life. So don't be cheap. Last thing on this point is your interaction when you connect with someone. It has to be PPP. PPP means it has to be purposeful, it has to be public, and it has to be professional. The first P, purposeful. So your interaction in Islam with the opposite gender, or even with the same gender who has same-sex attraction, is supposed to be purposeful. What does that mean? That means no surface chit-chat. Doesn't mean whether it's in person or whether it's online. What is surface chit-chat? All of a sudden you find a profile online. Hey, how's it going? Going pretty good. So, how's your day today? What are you eating now? Oh, I'm having this. Oh, what are you doing? So that's surface level chit chat. You can start off, how are you doing today? How's everything? But imagine, would you walk into a job interview and for half an hour you just talk about, oh, I love those burgers, and you just go back and forth talking about food? You wouldn't do that, right? So your interaction with the opposite gender, whether it's for the purposes of marriage or not for the purpose of marriage, should always be purposeful, number one. Number two, it has to, and that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it's in person or whether it's online. This is a huge problem in online Muslim matrimonials. People will come, they'll start texting, they'll start chatting, they go back and forth, and it's just chit chat. It's not supposed to be chit chat. It's supposed to be nice introduction, how are you doing today, and then get to the thing you're supposed to be interviewing for marriage. Number two, it has to be public. Okay, the Prophet, peace be upon him, he warned. He says, when a man and a woman are alone together in a room, the third person is shaitan, is Satan. Meaning he's whispering things to get people to, do something that is unlawful in Islam. So it has to be public. So what does it mean to be public? You cannot be alone in a private room. What is a private room? Private room means, for example, you say, okay, well, I met you online or I met you at the masjid. Let's go talk about marriage. We're going to meet in a park. You go to the park and you go all the way to the benches and you sit there, but there's nobody else in the park. That's private. It's not public anymore. Say, oh, let's go to a movie. Okay, so you go to a movie and the lights turn off and no one else can see you. That's not public anymore. That's private now. Okay, so being in a coffee shop or being somewhere else is going to technically be public, but it's not only public because people have dates in coffee shops. Right? So don't start going and be like, oh yeah, Sheikh Mustafa told us in the lecture that it's okay, we can just go meet up in the coffee shop for the purposes of marriage. If you do, your conversation still has to be purposeful. It still has to be professional. But what's recommended to clarify things. Just imagine if we see like a brother or sister from the masjid and they're sitting in a coffee shop with someone else and we don't know what's going on there and we know that both of them are not married, what are people going to automatically assume? And they have a right, they shouldn't be They shouldn't be prying, but at the same time, it's understandable that they're assuming, whoa, what is going on here, right? Like what is the probability that they're getting to know each other for the purpose of marriage versus the probability that they're just dating and having a relationship? So in order to prevent that from happening, some options are, number one, you have a family member or a mature friend in the room across the hall in the same place or sitting with you at the table. You can still talk about things. So you'll meet, for example, it's very common for families to come together and they say, okay, we're going to let the couple sit at this table. The two families will come and sit at the table over there. They can kind of have their private chit-chat. We're going to be here. We're not even eavesdropping on their conversation. But now, number one, it's public, right? And again, you'd say, well, there's people all around you. It's public anyways in a restaurant. Well, they're technically non-Muslims. So there's a different level of being public than if you have someone who's like your family member. So if you start flirting or something like that, if they glance over there, I'd be like, whoa, what the heck is going on over here? This guy's flirting, right? If they weren't there, people would be like, nobody cares, right? So somebody who actually cares about the PPP values should be there. That's a good practice, number one. Number two, even in email communication or in text messages, it's good practice to CC either your parents or a mature friend who serves as that other person to make your conversation public. And if you're talking on the phone and your family, when you're talking on the phone, make sure your family or your friend or someone is present kind of in the room so that the other person knows we're not just alone. Otherwise, what happens? People are talking for the purpose of marriage, very good intention, everything is good. I want to become a better Muslim. I want to start praying tahajjud. I want to come to the masjid more. We both have the same values and everything. And then we're talking on the phone, Did you pray your fajr this morning? Yes, I prayed my fajr this morning. MashaAllah, this is very good. Everything is going great. And then all of a sudden, the conversation begins to shift and they get emotionally attached. And all of a sudden, the next thing you know, they start talking about intimacy. They start talking about topics which they're not supposed to be talking about in a way. Sorry, not that they're not supposed to talk about it. In a way that they're not supposed to be talking about it. And all of a sudden, they're in love, they're in a relationship, and they're not married yet. This is a huge problem. That's why it's good to have someone, even when it's on the phone, it's good to have someone else there in a room so that you have some level of being public. If you need to talk about something private, you walk away for a moment and say, okay, I'm just going to talk about something a little bit private. I wanted to talk about, birth control with you, and this is a pretty important part of talking before marriage. You can walk away. You don't have to talk in front of your mother or your father. And then you come back and say, okay, we finished that topic. I'm coming right back in the room. Continue the conversation on the phone. So that's number two. The third P is professional. Professional means that you're not flirting. You don't make improper jokes, right? This is supposed to not just be a really casual conversation. It doesn't mean you have to be all uptight and like sitting there straight and all that. You can reveal part of your personality. You can tell some jokes. It's fine. It can be light conversation so people can feel your personality, but at the same time, should not be improper. Okay, how can you really know someone? That's a topic. It's a long topic. But for sake of time, you can know people even in a job interview, generally. You can never know them no matter how many months you spend with them, no matter how many dates you go on with them. You can never really know them until you really start spending a life together. When people move in together, they start to see things from a completely different perspective. Okay, so this idea of these rules, they're so strict, we're not going to ever get to know somebody else, that's not true. Go and read the research on this in relationships, and you'll realize that's not the case. These rules actually can give you enough to be able to know another person. Premarital consultation. Premarital consultation should almost be a requirement given the decline in family values today. We need to understand the process of engagement, the process of marriage, and the process of divorce in Islam. And this is what people need to know before they're going to get married. So they need to know, what does engagement look like? They need to know what is going to happen in marriage. They need to know what's going to happen in case the marriage breaks up and divorce takes place. So in a premarital consultation, the first and most important thing that's going to happen is you check for red flags. Red flags are things where when you see them, you want to say, wait a minute, I have to be extra careful. This is a potential danger. Potential dangers are if you're marrying somebody who needs a visa to come to the United States. Does it mean that the person is a bad person? No. Why is it a red flag? It's a red flag because there are many people in the world who are really dying and really want to come to the United States, which means that they can potentially be tricking you and have an ulterior motive of just trying to get you to sponsor their visa, and yet they're acting and pretending, and this happens a lot. So that's a red flag. Doesn't mean that you can't marry that person. It just means you have to be careful. Second red flag is mental illness. People can have a potential mental illness that's either diagnosed or undiagnosed, and that can cause major problems in the marriage. Red flag number 3, past addictions. People who have addictive personality or have been addicted to drugs, addicted to pornography, addicted to gambling, addicted to whatever it is, it's going to potentially affect the marriage if they've not fully recovered from that addiction. Red flag number 4, STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. Huge red flag. Doesn't mean the person you cannot get married, but you need to weigh the pros and cons of that. That brings us to the topic of blood test for genetic disorders. It might be a good idea, but whether or not it should be mandated is something kind of debatable, okay? So that's what premarital counseling talks about. A premarital consultation talks about all of these things. In our mosque here, we don't perform a marriage unless they've had at least one session of premarital consultation. Why? Not that we're trying to make marriage difficult for people, but we see so many breakups of marriages happening for reasons that could have easily been predicted. Some reasons you can't predict, right? Marriages break down. But it's something that could have easily been predicted, should have required more consultation before going into it. So we require a quick 20 to 30 minute consultation minimum, although much more is recommended, so you understand what you're getting yourself into when you go into marriage. The next thing is about marriage roles. And we talk about this during premarital counseling. And this is very important for people to understand. There are different views of how marriage should be. One of those views, which is very prominent in America, is an egalitarian marriage. Who's heard of the term egalitarian marriage before? Okay, so 10% of the people. So it's very important for you to know. The term doesn't matter, but egalitarian marriage basically means that both spouses are working, and both spouses will take care of the home, and both spouses will take care of the kids, which basically means there's equal power and equal responsibility in the marriage shifted across. It's equal across the board. Everything's equal. So you're going to work the same as I work. You're going to take care of the kids one day, I'm going to take care of the kids one day. You're going to cook one day, I'm going to cook one day. That is the idea of egalitarian marriage. Now, for people who are older than 40, you're like, that's kind of weird. But people who are under 40, look at this statistic. 64% of U.S. marriages with children under the age of 18, both the husband and the wife work, according to New York Times. This is becoming the default expectation of marriage for younger people. Expectation is different from reality. The reality shifts. But this is what many people are looking for when it comes to a marriage. And they need to understand that they need to determine whether or not this is really what they're looking for. So there's a book called Marriage, a History by Stephanie Kuntz. She says having a partner who does housework and childcare has become a bigger factor in women's marital satisfaction than many other factors that are used to predict marital happiness. Okay? So it used to be in the past, if a man's level of income was higher, there would be a higher level of marital happiness from the wife's side. That has changed. She said in the past, it used to be having shared religious beliefs was a greater predictor of happiness from the wife's side in a marriage. She said that is out the door, and that has changed as well. So now what it is having a partner who will do housework and who will take care of the children at a very high level is more important for women in America than the other two factors, right? So that means that the idea of egalitarian marriage is becoming very widespread and prominent. Opposite of egalitarian marriage is the traditional division of labor type of marriage, where basically the male's primary responsibility is to go and make money, to take care and safety of the household, and safety of the household, management of the household, and do what are called masculine chores. Masculine chores were basically taking out the trash, fixing the car, fixing things when they break, doing like the physical type of, changing light bulbs and all that stuff. And for the female chores were cooking, laundry, dishes, getting the kids ready, dressing them, taking them to school, doing homework with them, all of these type of things. So what you have is, you have you have more than these models, but two main models of marriage, egalitarian and traditional. And it's very important for people to understand what type of marriage are they expecting. Because if one partner is expecting an egalitarian marriage and another partner is expecting a traditional marriage, there's going to be major problems in that marriage. Even if they say, you know what, we'll try and work it out, because, she just looks so good. Or we'll work it out because, he has a really good income. So we'll figure this out. It's going to cause major problems, and that's what's discussed in premarital consultation. All right. I'm going to skip some points here and move on to engagement. Okay, so engagement in Islam is kind of pretty much like it's not a promise. It's a verbal agreement of an intention to get married in the future. That's all engagement really is in Islam. So engagement basically means that you have the intention to get married, and only one thing happens when you get engaged. And that is that nobody is allowed to propose to someone who is already engaged. What does that mean? It means if you're not engaged and you're meeting with someone and this is your 5th meeting with them, and all of a sudden another guy comes along and says, hey, are you interested in marriage? And she says, well, I'm kind of talking to someone right now. Like, that's okay, but would you be interested in talking to me as well? Right? Happens in job interviews, right? You're talking to a company, you're in round 3 of that company's interview, and all of a sudden another company approaches you, hey, we want to call you in for interview number 1. You say, I'm already in interview number 3 with the other company. That's okay. Just come and check out our company. It's okay. So technically, before engagement, you can do that. You can go and you can approach someone even if they're technically talking to someone, because engagement is when they've made that fine line step over where there's a level of commitment that no one else is supposed to come and interfere. Before that, people can come and interfere. Okay? Once that engagement happens, now no one should interfere. Now, what is engagement? Is engagement something that you have to have a party? No. Do you have to have a ring? No. Do you have to have food? No. Do you have to recite Surah Al-Fatiha? It's culture, but no. No, none of these things are there. So there is no fine line between exactly when engagement happens and when it doesn't happen. You just have to figure out, someone has to figure out, hey, if this person has been meeting 7 times with the other person, maybe there's a level of engagement that's there where I cannot come and propose to somebody else. If it's not there, then I can. I'm allowed to come in. It's kind of hard to figure that out, but you'll figure it out, What doesn't happen after engagement, it doesn't matter if you have a party, it doesn't matter if you have a ring, it doesn't matter if you had a cake, it doesn't matter if you've exchanged clothes, you've exchanged gifts, you've already started buying furniture. You're not married yet. So if you're not married, are you allowed to hold hands? But you're engaged now. No, you still can't hold hands. Are you allowed to go to the movies together now that it's dark? Are you allowed to be alone in private together? No. So basically, the 3 P's still apply when you're engaged. So someone will say, well, how can you get to know somebody then? You're already engaged. You're about to get married to them. How can you get to know them? You get to know them through the same process that you got to know them before the engagement. And you will only truly know them after you get married. And even after you're married, you'll still never truly know them. 10 years later, you'll find something different. 30 years later, you'll find something different. Human beings, that's human beings, right? You cannot read people's minds. You don't know what's going to happen. So you need to understand that. That's the process of engagement. And one more point on this is the idea of looking at a spouse. When you're looking at a spouse, you're allowed to look at what you're normally allowed to look at a person. So if sister is wearing hijab and she's covered, you're not allowed to look at something that is part of her aura or part of his aura. So aura from a man is approximately navel to the knee. Aura of a woman is everything except her face, hands, and feet. Now there's actually 2 scholars in history who said that you're allowed to look at a little bit more for a woman when you're proposing to her or when you're getting to know her for the purpose of marriage. There's a hadith about this, but the majority of scholars contextualized that hadith and said, no, that is not the case, and you're not allowed to look at more than that of whatever you're looking at, and that's the opinion that I incline towards as well. Why is this important? It's important because a lot of guys, naturally, are going to incline towards the other opinion. And they go, but I got a hadith to back it up. And I want that sister who's wearing hijab, I would like to see her without hijab before we get married. I would like to, just kind of, see if I'm really attracted to her or something like that. And my advice on this is that, look, two things. Number one, a lot of guys, they can't differentiate between women who are wearing a lot of makeup and not wearing a lot of makeup. Okay? This is the reality of my speaking with guys and speaking with girls. And the thing is, you may find, the makeup industry is, in one sense, it's evil, and in one sense, it's great. Right? So the thing is, we have a lot of ways to make people look a little bit enhanced and nicer, and that's fine. We comb our hair. Some people use gel in their hair. Some people iron their clothes. Some don't iron their clothes. All of this has an effect on appearance. So the thing is, if you were to look at someone and you're not necessarily attracted by their appearance at the moment you looked at them, it may not be the person. It may be that they didn't have their makeup on, or they didn't comb their hair in the proper way that you happen to be attracted to. And those things can be modified. There's a lot of modifications that can be made. So guys should be careful about realizing that there's airbrush, Photoshop pictures online. You may see a sister and you'd be like, they're both, mashallah, very religious. Everything is good. One of them, I'm just more attracted to her. I'm not so attracted to her. Well, you know what? I'm just going to say this. This one may have had a certain level of knowing how to dress herself that made her attracted to you, and this one didn't do it in her profile picture. Or in person, this one dressed herself in a way and the other one didn't, right? And a lot of that is malleable. And I'm saying this for the guys. The girls, same thing for the guys, but generally guys tend to be more focused on this. So that is something you should always keep in the back of your mind. You don't realize if someone is, wearing foundation or not. Most guys, how many guys even know what foundation is? Okay, most guys don't even know what foundation is. You think foundation is like your essential principles of Islam. Alhamdulillah, may Allah protect you and keep you firm in your foundation of Islam. So the thing is, all of that plays a role. So you need to know that. When it comes to girls, my advice to girls is don't wear so much makeup that it becomes almost deceptive. Because there was a prohibition by the Prophet, peace be upon him, on wearing hair extensions. Those of you who've come across that hadith, Muslim scholars contextualize that hadith and says that the prohibition on hair extensions was because there was a level of deception that was taking place in terms of their hair. It was not that hair extensions are intrinsically impermissible. So if there's such a level of deception that you're like wearing so much makeup, and then all of a sudden you're not going to look anything like that, the rest of the year or, most of the time, then there's some level of deception there. So be careful about that. All right, so basically an engagement is a verbal agreement that people intend to get married. If you break the engagement, is it sinful? No, nothing wrong with it at all. I mean, maybe socially, but other than that, not sinful at all. You still got to observe hijab, you still got to rule rules of PPP, and love will start building during this stage. But be careful, don't become too emotionally attached because you're not married. And if you become too emotionally attached and then some red flags come up, you know what's going to happen? What's going to happen is that you will recognize the red flag and you will ignore it because you're so emotionally attached that you don't want to get out. And then you get married and then you regret later on. You say, you know what? If I wasn't emotionally attached, I probably would have walked away from that potential opportunity, but I didn't, and now I regret it. So be careful about that. That's where premarital consultation needs to happen before the engagement. Too many people, what they do is they come one day before the marriage and they'll be like, yeah, I heard I have to do premarital before I get married. I just found out from the office that you won't perform the marriage unless we do premarital. Can we do it like right before the marriage? I'll come in like 20 minutes earlier before the marriage and we can do the premarital. Right? That kind of defeats the purpose of the premarital. How many people are going to be like, by the way, you know what? I see 3 red flags there. Oh, so you want me to call off the whole wedding? My whole family just flew in from New York. They're here. That is the wrong time to do it. You're supposed to do premarital way before the engagement process even happens. Okay? So a lot of common mistakes and misconceptions. The time is not looking favorable to me. So that whole 8 hours in 1.5 hours is not looking like it's going to happen. But let me at least try and finish some more of these points, inshallah. So dowry and premarital agreements. Dowry is something that is very important. It's necessary in Islam. Dowry is a gift from the husband to the bride, and it's known as the mahr. It is not to the family of the bride. That is in some cultures, that is not Islamic. It goes to the bride. It is a gift. So if it's a gift, what is the minimum value of that gift? It has to be something of value. You can't give like a candy bar. Here's a Hershey's chocolate bar. Okay, it's not sufficient for a dowry or for a mahr to be given. What is the maximum? There is no maximum. Okay, so if there's no maximum, you shouldn't exaggerate though. You'd be like, okay, I want $1 million, right? So there's no maximum, but there is a minimum. Minimum is something of value, $50, $100, something like that. But there's a lot of confusion on what the role of dowry or mahr is in Islam. And the reason why there's confusion is because oftentimes dowry becomes like a financial security for the wife in the event that the marriage breaks down. Now what's going to happen is, if the marriage breaks down and husband is making money and the wife doesn't have that money, what's going to happen? Where's her financial security and all of that stuff? Let's say she doesn't have a family who can come and take care of her or backing or something like that. Well, the financial security, they say, well, let's set a very high dowry and that'll become the financial security. Dowry was not intended to be a financial security. It was intended to be a gift. Gift is not financial security. But some people, their dowry is extremely small. I remember Azizan shared his dowry one time on Facebook a long time ago. What was it, like 34 cents or something like that in those days? Something really, really small, just to show you that, it, of course, adjusted for inflation, it was a lot more than that. Just want to clarify that. All right. And different country as well. So converted to dollars, adjusted for inflation. I'm not trying to put the guy down. But what it means is that the idea of dowry is shifted now. Now, is this a good thing or is it a bad thing? Okay, so the thing is, the original purpose of dowry was not to be financial security, but there should be financial security. So the best ideal way is to look at dowry as a gift, keep it as a gift, and then put into place some type of protocol or contract or agreement that serves as a financial security, right? For a potential future breakdown of the marriage, potential divorce that's going to happen. So what can you do? Keep the dowry as something symbolic, as a gift, and make a separate written or verbal contract that will be made for financial protection. Like, you know what? When I'm earning money and I get a job, I'm going to be making this much money. If you are, going to be at home with the kids or something like that, I'm going to be giving you monthly such and such percentage of my salary that you can save up, keep in your separate bank account, and it's going to be yours, and you're not going to have to worry about feeling like you're constrained, financially or something like that. I'm going to come back to this topic when we talk about California law and community property and of those things. Maybe not today, but in a future session. And we're going to talk more about this. But if the dowry is a large amount, even for gift purposes, sometimes some families who can afford it, sorry, let me clarify that. Some guys who can afford it, because the dowry is technically from the guy, not from the family, right? Some guys who can afford it, it might be $10,000. It might be $50,000, right? If they're wealthy, they can afford it, or they have a good job, they can do that. If it's going to be a large amount, my advice is to write it down as a binding debt instrument. Okay, what a debt instrument is something that is legally binding, that money is going to have to be paid if it's not paid up front. So for example, some people will commit to a $10,000 deferred dowry. Right now, they have student loans, they're sitting in college, they're not even making any money, but they go, you know what, you're probably going to get a good job, I want a $10,000 deferred dowry. And you say, okay, fine, I agree. That's going to be a gift from me to you. But if it's that amount, my advice is make it into a binding instrument. What is a binding instrument? Because if you leave it verbal and then you don't pay it and the guy says, oh, I didn't really agree to it or doesn't want to pay it or whatever it is or was confused, didn't understand what it meant, then it's not going to be paid. This is a debt that has to be paid. So when you write a document between yourselves, take it to a notary public, and you get it notarized, that is not sufficient because that is not a debt instrument. A debt instrument is an actual type of loan or IOU, an official IOU that's recognized by whatever state you're living in, and you get that signed in whatever capacity it needs to be signed in order to be enforceable and binding. Now, I know that sounds very unromantic, right? But when problems come in, or divorce comes in, or threats of divorce come in, or whatever it may be, it's not romantic either, right? And it causes a huge problem. So it's good to get these things done and get them done properly so there's no major disputes. Otherwise, it ends up in court. I've seen cases going to court, fighting over the dowry. The imam comes in and has to testify, say, how much was the dowry when you married them? You say, yeah, I performed the marriage of 100 people, 200 people every year. I don't remember what their dowry was. And it's very difficult, which is why we don't even write down the dowry now that these type of things happen. We just claim ignorant. We have no idea. Dowry was between the two of you. You guys figure it out. So if you want that, you want to be secure, make it a debt instrument like a demand note or something like that. It's payable. If you want to put a date, you put a date. If you don't want to put a date, you make what's called a demand note, meaning on demand, you owe me this much money when I, exercise my right to the demand note. If divorce takes place prior to consummation of the marriage or prior to the couple being alone in private where consummation of the marriage could have taken place, then the dowry is cut in half. Half the dowry is due. So if the guy owed $10,000, now he owes $5,000 if he divorced her. If he already paid $10,000, she has to give him $5,000 back. This is a very clear-cut verse in the Quran. Okay? If no dowry was specified and the marriage took place, is the marriage valid or is it invalid and they're an illegitimate couple? Still valid. The marriage is valid, but she has a right to a dowry. What is her right to dowry? She gets what's called mahr al-mithl, which basically means, how did I translate that? Customary dowry. Customary dowry means that if you got married Islamically, in an Islamic marriage contract, without a dowry being specified for you, you still have a right to dowry according to your custom and culture. Which means what, basically? It means that you go and you survey your friends and your sisters and your aunts and people in your environment, and you see how much did they get with similar characteristics. Whoever has a similar background of education, similar background of family lineage, similar background of, you're kind of similar to these people in terms of your value, quote unquote, on the marriage market. I know that's not a good way of putting it, but like your desirability from a cultural perspective. How much dowry did those people get? You were entitled to the exact same amount. If that's 1,000, if it's 5,000, if it's 10,000, whatever it is, you're entitled to the exact same amount. That's extremely difficult to determine, but you figure something out. Now, California law, when it comes to premarital agreements, okay, what's known as prenuptial agreements. People have this concept that a prenuptial agreement is usually for really rich people. And usually it is for really rich people, wealthy people. They're really rich and they get a prenuptial agreement so that, and usually it's, they look at it from the perspective, this is a male or actually a female wealthy person. Prenuptial agreement, you're going to get married. If there's a divorce, I get to keep all my money. I'm the rich person, you're not. You can't touch my property and my money. That's not just the case. The reality is there is a benefit of Muslims getting premarital agreements to clarify not only financial things, but a few other things to make sure that they're going to be binding in the event that the marriage begins to break down. So you have to understand that we're in California, but other people are watching this in different states. Different states have different rules when it comes to property distribution. In California, California has one of the strictest rules. California is one of the states that's known as a community property state. California law, like the other few states in the country that have community property, it's built on an egalitarian marriage. So if I explain to you what an egalitarian marriage is, the law is built on their ideal concept of what a marriage is supposed to be. So California law is built on the idea of egalitarian marriage. Both spouses should be working. Both spouses should be taking care of the kids. Both spouses are going to be earning somewhere along the same lines. And if there's a breakdown in the marriage, everything should primarily be distributed according to whatever income was there between the couple. Now, the problem with the law that is structured this way is that a person is entitled to community property, half of the property that exists, only after marriage, not during marriage. So let me give you an example. Legally, let's say a guy makes $100,000 a year. He puts that money that he's earning into a bank account with his name on it. His wife's name is not on the bank account. She's earning money. She makes $50,000 a year. She puts her $50,000 into her own bank account, and let's say he spends all his $100,000. He spends all of his money. She has $50,000 in her name. He spent all of the money in his name. He has no right to touch her bank account according to California law, not Islamic law. Okay, according to California law and Islamic law, but according to California law, he cannot touch her bank account because her name is not on it. His name is not on it, and she cannot touch his bank account when it had the money in there because her name is not on it. But in the event of death or in the event of divorce, all of a sudden, that money now becomes community property where it becomes mixed, and everyone has 50-50 right over it. What does that do? What that does is whichever partner, whichever spouse feels that they're getting the short end of the stick and they would like a longer end of the stick or a middle end of, they want their stick to get a little bit more towards 50-50, what is the only way or the fastest and best way to get 50-50? Either to help the other person to die or get out of the marriage and divorce, right? So what does that do? It actually encourages death and divorce. in a sense, right? So the best way to get that money that you didn't have access to during the marriage is to do this, right? Which is a problem in the system because California law does not enforce you to, when you make a bank account, you do not have to put your spouse's name on it. It's not a requirement. You can open a bank account in your own name and your spouse will not have access to your bank account. So that's legal. But the moment divorce or death takes place, all of a sudden, full access comes in. So there's this is a fairly recent law that's been developed from the 1960s, and I'll talk about it, later in another session. But this is a problem. So, and California has one of the strictest laws. So my personal advice is that Muslims should start entering into premarital agreements in order to clarify the division of property between them and to clarify some of the rights and responsibilities. Because, for one primary reason, and that is, in Islam, a man is considered to be financially responsible for the household. If a man is responsible for the household financially, even when the wife is working, and wives can work, no problem in Islam, but they're not required to spend on the family. If they get divorced, assuming that they're going to go and get remarried, guess what? The man now has to financially provide for another wife. The woman does not have to financially provide for the next husband. The husband needs to financially provide for her. So what's happening is if you apply the entire system of Islam, of Islamic law as a whole, you're going to find that this can potentially lead to injustice. And it can lead to injustice as well if the wife is earning more than the husband, and then all of a sudden she says, well, I'm earning more than you because I have a PhD and I'm a doctor and I'm making more money and you're whatever profession you are, you don't make that much money. But you're financially responsible for the household. I make $100,000, you make $50,000, you have to pay the rent for a house, you have to buy all the groceries, you have to buy all the clothing, and I keep all my money. And then what happens? You pronounce divorce on me. A man pronounces divorce, files for divorce, guess what? He says, and now 50% of all the money that you earn belongs to me. There's injustice. So injustice from this side, injustice from this side, and injustice in the event. So the assumption is that usually the injustice will always be against the woman, not when you apply the entire Islamic system. Why? Because when they get divorced and get remarried, the financial responsibility comes back on the new husband, and there's no financial responsibility on the wife towards the new husband. So you have to look at Islam as an entire system. So I'll end with this story. California has the strictest prenuptial, premarital agreement law in the entire country because of one guy, Barry Bonds. Does anyone know who Barry Bonds is? Baseball player, famous baseball player. I used to collect his cards. You guys know, a lot of the guys know who Barry Bonds is. Very famous baseball player. So here is what happened in a nutshell with Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds all of a sudden calls up his agent. He's making about $100,000, six-figure salary. He was still a really small-time baseball player. He was not very big, not very popular. He calls up his agent and he says, you know what? I've fallen in love with the woman of my dreams. We are going tomorrow to Las Vegas and we're getting married. The agent freaks out. He says, no, this is really bad. I'm your agent. What are you doing? Don't do this. And he goes, no, I am in love. I love this woman. She's going to be my wife. You can't stop me. And he goes, and he was a good agent. So what does he do? He says, okay, listen. Okay, we got your limousine. Okay, he gets a limo. He gets Barry Bonds' lawyer. He gets a notary public guy. He says he hires a private one, throws them into the limousine while they're driving to Las Vegas to get married. He drafts up all these documents, and he has the woman sign the document and say, look, prenuptial agreement that Barry Bonds is a celebrity, he's making a lot of money, he's going to be making a lot more money, and, you know, he needs financial protection because he's a good baseball player. He's going to become something really big, and we don't want him to, you know, have all of his money taken away. So what happens? She signs the document, she agrees. You know, she thought this is very unromantic, but, you know, I love you and everything's good. So they drive to Las Vegas, they get married. Within 6 years, marriage breaks down, divorce. So what happens? She goes, Barry Bonds goes, look, prenuptial agreement, sorry, you signed it, and now Barry Bonds was making $100,000 a year. Now Barry Bonds is making $13 million a year. And she goes, I have a right to everything, including half of that $13 million per year that you've been making and everything like that. And Barry Bonds' agent, who probably he kept, he goes, nope, you signed this agreement, so you don't have that right, and therefore you don't have it. So she goes, okay, I'm going to sue you, takes him to court. So they go to the court, and the court rules in favor of the woman and says she was forced and coerced into signing that prenuptial agreement, and it was completely unfair, and he has oppressed her, and this is a type of abuse that took place against her. Therefore, she's entitled to all of that money. Barry Bonds' lawyers are also very good because he pays them a lot of money. They come and say, we are contesting this case. We're taking it to the Supreme Court of California. So they go to the Supreme Court of California, and they retry the entire thing, and the Supreme Court of California rules in Barry Bonds' favor, and the woman gets nothing. So what happens? Everyone freaks out in Sacramento, and they say, we want to make sure this never happens again to anybody. So they go to the lawmakers, and they pressure them to sign a new law, and the new law now is, after Barry Bonds' divorce, that from now on, any premarital agreement that has taken place in the state of California is not valid unless both sides were represented by their independent lawyers while it was being signed, and there's an X amount of days, I forgot what it was, that needs to happen in order for that document to be valid. So this is only in the state of California. So if you move to New Mexico, to Nevada, to Michigan, to Chicago, you move anywhere, for a period of time, and then you divorce, in that case, the prenuptial agreement would be valid, but it won't be valid in the state of California. So this is the way that law works in America, and states are different across the board. So I mentioned that Muslims should be utilizing this as a template. I anticipate this is going to become common within 10 to 20 years as Muslims begin to see the negative effects of lawsuits and fighting things out in court and marriages going to court and all of these things happening, not in a way that's going to oppress either party, but in a way that's in line with Islamic values, like I mentioned, in terms of the man usually in a traditional marriage and under Islamic law being financially responsible for the family, and the woman not having to do that, okay? So I completely missed my promise of trying to summarize this entire topic, but it looks like this is definitely an 8-hour seminar, as you can see. So let me ask you this. How many of you would be interested in that seminar if we did a seminar like in a few weeks? Okay. Out of those who are interested, how many of you will actually clear your schedule and show up on a Saturday to come to that seminar? Okay, then we'll do it inshallah ta'ala. All right, so alhamdulillah. I'll take at least 5 minutes worth of questions and then we can conclude inshallah ta'ala. So are there any questions on what we've covered? Yeah.
Just want to clarify, it's not an 8-hour session on a Saturday.
Yeah, it'll be 8-hour session on a Saturday. You're out. You're on the maybe. Okay. Let me do that one more time, because before I actually do 8 hours on a Saturday, it's also my time. How many of you will actually come on a Saturday 8-hour seminar for this topic, marriage and divorce, in this level of detail, more detail? I'm going to hold you to this, okay? Okay, inshallah. So hopefully in December, if not December, January for sure. We'll look out for the email, inshallah. Okay, other questions? 4 and 4? Sunday is not a good day for me. Oh, 2 weeks? You prefer 4 and 4? Who prefers 4 and 4? Raise your hand. A lot of 4 and 4. So 4 on, okay. So what time is good? 9? Can you make it by 9 or too late, too early?
10 to 2 or 11 to 2.
That's what I figured. 10 to 2 with the break, so 10 to 3. 1 hour lunch break, right? 10 to 3. Okay, inshallah. Okay, I'll keep that in mind. So we'll do one marriage, one divorce then, inshallah. We'll keep them separate seminars, inshallah. All right. Other questions? Any other questions? Yes.
I have a question about the
Dowry.
dowry. At what stage in the process would you recommend to discuss the dowry or even hand over the dowry?
Good question. So what stage in the process to discuss the dowry, and then you said hand over the dowry? Okay. So what stage in the premarital process do you discuss the dowry? Definitely not in the first meeting. Okay? Unless you're a sister who is demanding a high level of dowry, and you want to bring it up at the end of the first session, maybe you should. Otherwise, the guy's like, oh, everything's looking great. And then she goes, by the way, $10,000 dowry. And he's like, whoa, no, that's not going to happen. So probably not the first session. What I find is dowry usually gets negotiated very well between couples. It's the families that have a problem with the amount of dowry. That's what I'm generally tending to see in my experience. But I think second or third session is not a problem discussing the dowry. I think that would be appropriate. Or even if you delayed it more, it would still be appropriate. Because sometimes when you keep getting to know the person, everything is checking out, everything's looking good, then all of a sudden, if you are only willing to give less, the other person may be willing to settle. Meaning, there's a lot more, let's put it this way, there's a lot more likelihood of mutual agreement on whatever the dowry is going to be when there's a lot more compatibility discovered in the process. Okay? When do you give the dowry? The dowry is only due after marriage. You never give dowry before marriage. So that's one point. In terms of deferred dowry versus non-deferred dowry, there was one point I didn't actually cover yet, which I'm going to cover. The idea of deferred dowry being conditional upon divorce does not exist in Islam. This is an innovation in Islam. It is unlawful in Islam. Let me explain what that means. People have this idea, what's called mu'akhar. Mu'akhar mean a deferred dowry. So basically, people will get married and they say, you give $5,000 dowry right now, and you're going to give a $500,000 deferred dowry conditional upon divorce. And the guy doesn't make that much money, and he's probably never going to have that much money in his life. So basically, you can never divorce our daughter, right? Never going to happen. If you do, you owe her $500,000. You cannot do that, because what you're doing is you're trying to prevent divorce even in the event of a really bad breakdown in the marriage, and you can't do that because you're trying to override and overrule the permissibility of divorce which Allah has given in Islam, right? So that's not allowed. In terms of whether you defer the dowry, how long should you defer it for, and all of that stuff, that just depends on your agreements between the two of you. Okay. Questions from the sister side? Nope. Question from the brother side? Yes.
What is the big difference between CBD and what you call it, engagement? And engagement in back home, they say like khutuba.
Yes.
Khutuba,
Get ring and everything.
It's before marriage, but engagement looks like what is
PPP rules? Huh.
That's between that, but we have like what do you call it?
The status?
Dating.
Dating.
Yeah, dating.
Yeah.
What is the only difference is just
Only difference,
it's like getting
only difference for engagement is that no one else can propose. Nothing else. You can't start dating after you get engaged. You can't go alone to, go bowling together or something like that, After you're engaged, and you say, before we're engaged, we can't do that. After engaged, we can do that now. You can't, there's no...
it happened with only like a teenager. That's engagement.
Yes. Back home, I know. So back home in many countries, the assumption is that once they're engaged, now they can kind of start doing a little bit dating and all that. That's not the case in Islam. The same thing that they could do before marriage, before engagement, is the same thing they can do after engagement. So people need to adjust. This is a huge cultural problem where people don't understand what Islam teaches. If they want to start dating, here's my suggestion. My advice is get the marriage contract done. Don't have them consummate the marriage. Meaning don't be in private. So they can start dating because they're married. But they don't consummate the marriage. They're not going to have children since they're not consummating the marriage. If they get divorced, there's no waiting period for the woman. If they get divorced, it's only half of the dowry going to be returned. So get married, do the contract, let them date. They can be together, they can hold hands, they can walk in a mall, they can go to a movie together, but they're not technically private where they can consummate the marriage and,
That's happening in engagement.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. So what's happening is, after engagement in many Muslim countries and many cultures, they're assuming that they can do everything except consummation of marriage. Actually, after the marriage contract, you're supposed to get married, then you can start dating and keep a period where you've not consummated the marriage. My advice for people, my sincere advice is college students, we should start this practice. Get them married. When they go to college, get them married. Marriage contract, but no consummating the marriage. No kids are going to be coming out. You're not going to be sleeping with one another. And you know what? Inshallah, it works out. But worst case scenario, if it doesn't work out, the harm is much more minimal, but they protect themselves from haram while they're in college. All this dating going around, all these temptations, frat parties and sorority parties and all of that stuff.
That's the official marriage already done.
That will be. Nikah, the contract.
Yeah, but when you get it, okay, if it's not working after 1 year, it becomes divorce, it's going to know all these cases. It's like a regular marriage.
Okay, with regards to registering the marriage and how to alternatively register the marriage, I'm going to talk about that in the seminar, inshallah. In terms of when we register the marriage, is there another option to prevent all the legal issues that you're dealing with the divorce that takes place after 1 year or 2 years? That's what you're talking about.
That's meaning you're going to be like Islamic
So there's a way to do Islamic marriage without the full registering, but with another way of making a contract that actually indicates marriage, but that's not so difficult. So I'm going to talk about that from the legal perspective a little bit. It is a huge issue. I agree. You're right. It's a huge issue. Huge issue. Yes. Yes. No. I agree. You cannot prevent people from consummating the marriage if they want to. But just think about it this way. Let's say they're living on a college campus. They're living in dorm rooms. Where are they going to go get a hotel? I mean, they could, right? But assuming that culturally they're going to not consummate the marriage. I agree. Let's say advice can be given, right? Yeah. Alhamdulillah. Yes. Yes, yeah, she is married. That's why I say, so once the marriage contract is done, they can start dating. So, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. MashaAllah. May Allah make all parents like you, encouraging their children. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. All right. Any other questions before we end? Yes.
Can you speak about the last part of the divorce part?
Sure, I can do it in 4 hours, inshallah. Okay, here I'll say this one part about divorce. So I will tell you the correct procedure to get divorced in Islam so that we have an understanding. So I'm glad you asked that. Here is the correct process. If a man wants to divorce his wife, he's going to make one statement of divorce during the wife's purity period between two menstruations, where he did not have intercourse with her in that purity period. And then they're going to wait until she completes 3 menstrual periods. And if she doesn't have a menstrual period, then 3 months. If she's pregnant, then delivery or loss of the fetus. And during that time, she's supposed to continue living with her husband. Once that period expires, she's not the wife anymore and the divorce has finalized. And because he made one pronouncement of divorce and the divorce is over, they're allowed to get remarried later on, and she does not need to remarry anybody else. Now, if anyone understood any of that, great. If not, just go back on the video and just listen to exactly what I said and just slow it down. And this is exactly the correct way of divorce process in Islam, which sadly, I would say 95 to 98% of people don't know. And there is no difference of opinion among scholars that this is the correct way to get divorced in Islam. And sadly, for some reason, people don't know it. So that was kind of what I wanted to do, but I think I really over-prepared for this section. But I think it is really a needed seminar, inshallah. And we'll make it available, online later on for people who cannot make it to the seminar, inshallah. Yes.
The model of so I see this happening down the line. So the model of 2 individuals getting married, let's say for financial reasons they can't live together or whatever. So they get married knowing they're going to consummate the marriage, but they're still living separately. Down the line, this looks like a very probable model. Do you see any major flaws in it?
Okay, 2 people are living separate.
Let's say they're still living at home.
Okay, let's say they're both still living at home with their parents. They're going to get married. They know they're going to consummate the marriage, but they're going to continue to remain living with their parents. Is this going to be a future potential problem when they move in with each other? Honestly, I don't see a huge problem with that. There could be, the adaptation, what happens if she gets pregnant and this and that. As long as their intention is to eventually move in together, a lot of it depends on why they're living separate and why they're not able to move in together. If it's 1 year, 2 years, or if they're living in different states or something like that, or even living in different countries, I don't see a problem with that as long as the future plans are clear and they're on track. I don't see an issue with it. Yeah. Anyone else? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Also, then I would just say in that situation, it would be important if they're living at home for the boundaries to be discussed in perhaps the premarital consultation of understanding, because there will be the husband's rights within the family, each of them, the wife's rights, and then her family, etc. So that would
You mean if she moves in with him, or you mean if they in the time that they're separate? Yeah, okay.
be a discussion prior to maybe consummating
Yeah.
what the expectations would be in those.
Okay, yeah. So Dina, she's a licensed counselor. So she's saying that it's important to discuss with the family what that situation is going to look like in terms of relationship with the family while they're being married and coming into the household and all of that stuff. So that's important as well. Yeah. Who has not asked a question yet? Go ahead. Okay, if the husband and the woman are both working, then if we apply the Islamic law and the California law at the same time, it's going to be unjust for the husband. No, that's not exactly what I was saying. It depends on how much each one of them is making. It depends on what their contribution was to the family. Right. So what I was saying is in the Islamic system, so when I mentioned the California system, only in the event of divorce and division of assets that were earned during the marriage. When I was talking about the Islamic system, I was only talking about financial responsibility of the husband towards the family and not vice versa. So for example, the woman who's, whatever money she makes, it belongs to her 100%. She does, in Islam, she doesn't need to spend any of that money on the household. So if the husband's income, whatever he's making, if he ends up spending all of his income on the family, and her income she gets to keep, then if they apply California law of divorce, she's going to be wronged because she just lost all the money that she had saved up because he takes half of it. If he was making a lot of money and she was making very little and he didn't spend all of his money on the thing, then the husband is going to be wronged in the sense that she's going to be taking all of this, half of this money, and then if he goes to get remarried, he's going to be financially responsible for his next wife. And if she gets remarried, she's not financially responsible in that marriage. So she took that money, not needing it for the next financial responsibility, in addition to taking her own money that she was getting when she worked. In the last case, so in the last case, they need to come to an agreement. So this is where it's not clear. Okay, so it's not clear cut, and Islam does not give you a number. It doesn't give you a fixed formula. So you need to come up with a number and say, okay, well, you know what? Based upon your contribution to the household of whatever you're going to be doing, let's say a woman has, let's say they both have PhD, okay? And they're both going to be earning the same thing. And they decide to homeschool their kids. And the wife decides, I'm going to be homeschooling the kids. I'm homeschooling the kids, now I can only work 20 hours a week from home in my spare time. So I'm taking care of the kids, you're working, you're traveling, you're doing all these things, and I'm doing all of this other thing. Because I'm giving up part of my career for taking care of something that's necessary for the household, I should be compensated to the level of sacrifice that I'm giving up from my career. Should that be exactly half of his income? Not necessarily, because if they split, he's financially responsible for a new family, she's not financially responsible for a new family. So there needs to be some kind of compensation there, for her own financial protection and just for everything that she's doing. What that amount is, very hard to figure out. Case by case, exactly. So there should be something, but it's case by case. Yeah. Yes.
So in regards to divorce, it is wrong that you said to do like if the wife refuses to stay there for the 3 months. Is that
Okay, so in the event of divorce, if the wife refuses to stay inside the home, then he's not financially responsible for her during that time anymore, during that period. Is that kind of the question?
but he would still put his son to divorce, and that would still be proper.
It's not ideal, but here's the thing, okay? If he pronounces divorce, if she wants to reconcile, then she would want to stay with him and try to get him to reconcile. If she doesn't want to reconcile, she's not supposed to leave, but she's technically not supposed to leave during that time. But if she leaves for some justified reason, let's say he's threatening her, he's physically abusive and she thinks she's going to be harmed or something like that, or she has a business trip and she has a very important life-dependent seminar to give in Switzerland or something like that. She has to be gone for a month. If she has to go, she has to go. She can go, for a good reason.
But if she asks for divorce?
So there's different rules when a woman asks for divorce. It's called khula. So we're going to cover that, inshallah, in the seminar. Inshallah. You already asked the question, right? Go ahead.
So if, two people get married and then they get divorced for some reason.
Yep.
Because of the red flag on one of them.
Yep.
That was major.
Yeah, one of them got a major red flag. Yeah.
And then when one of them's looking for another husband or wife.
Yes.
And then they look, and then you cross about that divorce, and then they see that the flag's gone, are they allowed to?
Good question. Yes. So basically what he's saying is you got a couple, they get divorced because there's a red flag there, and then they start searching around and they realize that red flag is now gone from the original person. Can they get remarried again now that the red flag is gone? Yes, as long as they had not divorced 3 times. So if they divorced once like they were supposed to do in the first place, they can get remarried. Remarried means a new dowry. You gotta pay another $10,000. You know, it means another party. Party's usually more expensive than the dowry. Another party in a hotel, another everything. But yes, they can get remarried if the red flag is gone.
So, this is with regards to this community property. What happens in the event of the death of the husband when you have the house and the other assets and everything? Would it be fair, as per the Islamic Sharia, that the children, they inherited like the children and everyone, get a lower percentage because of the California law that we have, and how do you overcome that?
Okay, so you're asking, would it be fair in the event of the death of a person with property? Is it fair that the children who are supposed to be inheriting the estate of the deceased, that they're getting a lower share due to California community property law? Yeah, it is unfair. How do you overcome that? Prenuptial agreement, premarital. Premarital agreement is for divorce and death. So that's why there's a postmarital agreement. So there is such thing as a postmarital agreement. You can make this agreement at any time. The difference is, many people when they're already married, if they think premarital agreements are unromantic, they're going to think postmarital agreements are even more unromantic. So people are just less likely inclined. But I think, again, I'm not a lawyer, right? You check with someone who's an attorney, a specialist in this field. But I think I came across somewhere that you can make a postmarital agreement as well. Or you can restructure things, restructure your assets and your contracts in a way that it can be redistributed. Or you can put it in a trust as well. And if they agree, you can put it in a trust, and the trust will be distributed according to Islamic rules of inheritance. Without a trust, can a will supersede the law? No, a will has no effect. Because what's going to happen is this. The moment in the event of death, community property, basically if the name is on the deed, or community property law will come into effect, which means 50-50 split. Or sometimes the property is going to be held that when the person dies, the spouse will take the entire property, right? Like a joint bank account, will take the entire thing. What happens is, if that entire thing transfers immediately upon death in the other person's name, then they own 100% of it. If they own 100% of it, then the deceased property doesn't include this property. Their children will only get what they own, and they don't own this anymore. If 50% transfers over, then what's going to happen is their 50% will be distributed to their heirs, and the other 50% is not in their ownership, so it will not be distributed. That's the way it's going to happen. So what you want to do ideally, if you want to get proper inheritance, and I covered this in the inheritance seminar, if you want to do inheritance properly, what you need to do is you need to specify very clear ownership over joint assets. Because joint assets are problematic from the perspective of they're not clear. So they're not necessarily joint when they're held where you're living. They're not 50-50, but they're joint, and they become 50-50 upon death, or they transfer upon death. That's a problem because there's unclarity of where the ownership actually lies. In Islam is the simple concept of Islamic ownership of property is you either own property or you own a percentage of property. You don't incidentally potentially own a type of property in the event of something that's going to happen. So you need to specify what is your share in the property. If you want your wife to own 50% of the house, then she owns 50% of the house. And make it very clear cut. She has 50% of the house. So when you die and you say, should my house be distributed? Only your property gets distributed, which is 50% of your house, because that's the only part that you own that gets distributed. So whatever percentage of ownership you have, you want to specify that. When it's in a 401k, when it's in an IRA account, you have joint holding of that. You want to make that very clear. When it comes to your beneficiary for your company's pension plan, you want to make sure is that if your wife is your beneficiary, your primary beneficiary, is this pension plan belonging to you, that you want it distributed according to Islamic rules of inheritance across all of your heirs? Or is it going to completely transfer over to your wife such that this does not get distributed at all to any of your heirs? Everything needs to be specified in a percentage, and that's not default by law. So you got to break out of that with a legal contract, usually with the trust, to clarify what percentage of ownership is owned by whom, and how can it potentially get changed in the future. So that's what needs to be done. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Let me summarize it again. Or oh. In the event of divorce. Yeah, so no. So this is, you can make a contract like that, I guess, but you can't call it mahar. Mahar is dowry. When you come up with this idea of mu'akhar, say in the event of divorce, you're going to have to pay this much marriage, if it becomes a means of trying to stop divorce from happening, which oftentimes it does, you're undermining one of the purposes of the Sharia that allows divorce. That shouldn't happen. Instead, make a contract and say, you know what? You're getting married. In order to make sure you're financially secure, I'm going to give you $10,000 per year for 10 years. Commitment, like a loan commitment. Make that your mu'akhar. You can do that if you wanted to do that. But even if you don't get divorced, he still has to pay it. So if you end up 60 years down the road, you've been married for 60 years, he still needs to pay that. That's the way mahar works. Right? Any other type of contract that goes into economics, whether you're allowed to make a contract that's conditional upon that, what happens is that is a contract that's built on what's called gharar. Gharar is uncertainty of the future. So uncertain contracts have been prohibited by the Prophet, peace be upon him, because you don't know if divorce will happen or it won't happen. So if you put a variable, it says this contract or transaction, economic transaction, only goes into place if divorce happens. What's the likelihood of divorce? We don't know. 50-50. That's almost like a gamble, right? So it's a type of gambling which has been prohibited in Islam. You can't make a contract like that. Okay? All right. Yes.
So in the context of getting to know a person before marriage, like you were bringing up the analogy of it being a job interview.
I know it's not a perfect analogy of a job interview. It's obviously more,
But I think like
you know.
even small talk, even like just mutual talk, like that's still important because you get to know the person, like what their hobbies are.
Agree. In a job interview, there's small talk. Many companies will do small talk to get to know the personality of the person, because they're not only hiring the person's skills, but they're hiring their personality. But what they're not going to do is the entire interview is not going to be small talk, ever, right? Because there's a deeper purpose. Whereas when you're dating, the entire date can be small talk. In fact, usually it is. Like when you go on a date, first 5 dates, you know, you're not going to talk about, oh, what kind of life do you envision? Just talk about food, you talk about this, what are your favorite movies, what are your favorite color? Oh, we have the same favorite color in common, great. We're going to make a really strong couple. You're not, because when you have a problem in your marriage, you're not going to be like, why are we fighting? We have the same favorite color. We both love caramel frappuccinos, you know, like that's not going to help you, right? So it's good to know that personality aspect, but at the same time, you need to focus a little bit on the topic too. Right? It's a balance of both. Yes, you can know the person, you can get to know their personality. I'm not saying like a really formal job interview, like a casual job interview. Let's put it that way. Casual job interview. All right. Okay, any other questions? Yes. Okay, it's a good question. The question is, let's say guy stops providing for the family. He is providing, he stopped providing for the family. Do you divorce him? Do you stay married to him? What do you do? So it's going to come into the category of divorce, but the simple answer is you have valid grounds to divorce him, to initiate khula. Do you want to or should you? That's a personal choice. Okay? So, do you have to? No. Should you? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on the personal situation. Are you allowed to? Absolutely. Right? Are you allowed to? Absolutely. So the thing is, when it comes to a woman petitioning for nullification of the marriage, which is called khula, basically petitioning for release of the marriage, it's different. Divorce is from the man's side and khula is from the woman's side. Usually there's supposed to be some reason that the woman is asking for khula. Is not providing financially for the family valid grounds for khula? Very valid grounds. Like 100% clear cut. It's on the highest list of valid grounds. Right? Do you have to? No. I mean, even when it comes to divorce, someone is horrible. They're cussing you out every single day. They're doing something really bad. Do you have to divorce them? No. But maybe you should. You know? So it just depends, case by case. But yeah, you definitely have grounds. There's definitely grounds for that. Okay? Yes. Last question, inshallah. That is last. For everyone.
Yeah, there's more domestic violence now these days.
Mm.
What happens if there's a restraining order among the couples
Mm.
and it's, taken for 3, 4, 5 years? And, naturally, how the divorce works in that case?
So if there's a restraining order for several years, how will divorce work in that case? The divorce will still get processed despite a restraining order. It will still, the restraining order doesn't prevent. Islamically, the restraining order is completely separate from the idea of divorce. Divorce can still proceed with the restraining order, right? So marriage cannot proceed with the restraining order because you're not allowed to be next to each other, But otherwise, yeah, divorce can proceed with the restraining order still. There's no issue with that. There's no issue legally, California, and there's no issue Islamically either. Okay? All right, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us to choose the right people for marriage, make our families strong families, and help us to be true servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nastaghfirukallah wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum.